Hi, folks. Hey, listeners. Hey, mums. Hey, dads. Anybody who's up at this time, or it might be early for you, might be midday, whenever. We are just really, really blessed to have Pete Chan with us today, Dr. Pete Chan, actually. And I will leave Pete to share with us the number of letters he's got after his name. They confuse the crap out of me. But Pete is somebody I've been a fan of for some time now, and he, for Kerry and I especially, has been saying and doing things and helping people along their journey since we've arrived at this stage in our evolution as a species, let's say. Pete's medical journey starts back in 1997 when he was vowing to do his best to improve health and well-being of the people that he encountered. He's journeyed through diverse clinical specialities with an early career as a junior surgeon, but it was patient advocacy that steered him towards his latest choice as general practitioner. And the last 12 years have really opened his eyes to the world of health politics, service development, training and recruitment, and undifferentiated medical service, which hopefully Pete will educate me a little bit around that shortly. It's taught him how reductionist and protocol-driven medicine is at best ineffective and at worst detrimental to the overall well-being of his patients. He's spent the last 4 years being a student of life and studied more than he has in the last 20 to establish root causes of modern ills and holistic approach to treat root cause and improve well-being. So that's so cool. And he has observed that he gets remarkably better patient outcome with this approach. Allopathic medicine still has its place, he says, but it is not the end all and be all. So this podcast is intended for us to invite Pete in to share with us what does it look like to produce or create as stress-free a body system, emotional, physical, and mental as possible. We're going to have some fun here. So welcome, Pete.
Well, thank you, Ben. Well, thank you for inviting me and giving me the opportunity and platform to share my experience, my knowledge. And the intention really is about how we can use, knowledge and people's expertise and competence to try and ultimately to improve our well-being, really. And I think very often now we associate well-being with the physical well-being. So actually, well-being is far beyond that. And so, I'll do my best to try to paint some of the outcomes I see as a GP, or I tend to call myself more functional medicine practitioner now, where I look at the entire spectrum of what actually will inform and conform the best well-being for an individual. And I'm quite unusual in that I'm not your sort of typical GP who spout out quite, the usual, oh, this and that, and so on, protocol and guidance and so on. And, throughout my career, I've always been a black sheep in the family. Nearly lost my career on 2 occasions because patient advocacy and dare to define, challenge authority. But that's important, really. I think doing the right thing is really the only thing that we can do. And if something doesn't make any sense, or if things that you see or experience is actually causing harm, the right thing to do is actually challenge that and change for the better, Ben.
Yes, and I have witnessed you speaking out and changing the game, or being part of a changing of the game over the last 18 to 20 months. I know we're going to get to some of that in a bit. It's very difficult for us not to, really. It's a very, very important subject for right now. Just going to ask a few questions, Pete, around your background, what's driven you in this direction, tell us about your heart, and what's been your drive to get you to this point? Go back as far as we need to for this nutshell.
Yeah, sure. I suppose that throughout my entire life and so on, that sort of caring or helping has always had that very special place in that I get the most buzz when when I care, when I can contribute and so on, when someone actually benefit from that, whether they show gratitude or not, it doesn't really matter. It just gave you that really instinctive, warm feeling going, yes, that was great. But looking back now and so on, I suppose that we can explain that physiologically. A lot of that is down to for your neurochemical response, really. So dopamine response to give you that instant high, that oxytocin response that gives you that love and the compassionate feeling and so on. They're very, very powerful drivers and so on. And we evolved with those responses in mind for very specific purposes and so on. So I kind of discovered very early and instinctively that's what that made me tick and so on. So, I went to med school, and they teach you all the things you need to know and so on, but no, actually by the time you finish you probably remember 5 or 10% at the most. And then through medical training it's been very brutal, really, working 90 hours a week, not spending any family time, and then you pretty much sacrifice your entire existence for for one thing, really, which is providing care. So it kind of reconfirms and it really does consolidate some of that instinctive feel. Otherwise, it's going to be pretty difficult to survive in this tough environment. And some people survive, and some people get by. And I don't think it's good enough just to survive, really. We need to thrive. And then, like I said before, that I nearly lost my career on a couple of occasions in the past. And so on, the first one is when I defied a consultant as a junior surgeon to save, his patient's life and so on. And whilst I was advocating for someone's life, the other person was advocating for his egotistic reputation and so on. How dare you? How dare you defy me and so on? I'm your superior. I mean, as far as human being is concerned, superiority and seniority, they shouldn't come into it. And so at that stage, I had to make a very clear choice. Do I stay because I like the surgeon title, and rather than being called a doctor, you're Mister in the country and so on, and enjoy all the trimming of a surgical career, or do I need to pursue something that's closer to my heart, which is patient advocacy? And I decided, I can't survive in that environment, pretending that I'm some kind of big shot. And much rather that working with patients and so on, because ultimately what I do to patients and so on is ultimately what I would do for myself and my family and all the people that I care about and so on. So it's also very selfish in that reason, that I want to make sure that my heart and soul remains in the right place. And so going to general practice and did all my training. I become a GP trainer myself, and basically teaching the next generation, not just looking at the disease or illness and so on. You must consider the person sitting in front of you. That person has more than just health issue in front of you. Every single person requires 4 very important pillars to ensure our health, our well-being. So we need to enjoy good health. We need to enjoy decent wealth, not just financial or material, but also spiritual, psychological, mental health, and societal. Every person needs a purpose, okay, and every person needs a community. It's only with the existence and codependency of those 4 pillars that a person can truly thrive. And so I kind of worked out over the years that you can't just concentrate on health side and so on. You really have to explore all 4. Some you might be able to influence, some you will not, and so on. But if you don't really fully understand the whole picture, hence why it's called holistic approach. And then how can you try to influence or manipulate or constructively change? And a lot of what I do nowadays is that as you drill down to the modern ills and so on, you actually realize everything we do at this stage is really against human evolutionary biology. And there's no wonder that we become ill and sick. And then by understanding that, actually a lot of what we do is what we do to ourselves. You can start to take that and turn that energy around positively to start make some changes. And a lot of the root causes of modern illness is actually incredibly simple. And I'll share a bit about human evolution biology with you later on into the podcast, and then we can explore why I do what I do. So that's broadly my journey. And And at the same time, being in general practice or being a generalist for over a decade and so on, you start to realize, do you know what? Actually, it's really unsatisfactory how the world works, really. We come across conditions all the time. We come across suffering all the time. And but all we tend to do is just to, manage the symptoms. And we call a lot of illness nowadays chronic disease. And by definition, chronic diseases are those conditions that's likely to progress without any prospect of a cure or reversal. But is that true? The conventional wisdom tells us it's true, but actually from personal experience, it's not true. So when you start to see this difference, incongruency between what you get taught and to what you actually see, and you kind of have that eureka, penny dropping moments going, actually, instinctively, I know I'm doing the right thing here. And then it's really nice when you get the feedback that actually people are doing really well. So, I used to see all the heart sink patients, where they come in and out with the same problem, or multiple different problems. No one wants to see, and they say, the troublemaker, heart sinking, every time you hear the name, whoa, no again. But actually, they are really interesting cases, because once you sat down and listened through their journey, understanding, or not just understanding, really, understanding is one thing, but being empathic, empathize with their situation, put yourself in their shoes, and then try feel what they feel throughout their journey. You develop this appreciation of why they do what they do nowadays, and then why they behave in the way that they behave. And you can start to look at constructive recommendations or helpful plans and so on to sort of change that negative for the positive and so on. So I get lots of people with chronic anxiety, depression and so on, but actually they're very easily treated. It does not involve antidepressants. It does not involve long-term psychotherapy. And a lot of the time, that's by the time you grasp and empathize the issue and on root issue, they get better.
So Pete, could you keep it really, this is perfect. Can you keep it really simple for us and sort of build this up? So in your experience, what factors are, because this is stress-free dads, and I know stress is just one area to examine of many, but hey, we've got to start somewhere here at least. What life factors contribute to stress in the body, in the mind, etc.? And could you even isolate what are, in your experience over the past year or so, what are the current biggest contributors to stress?
Sure. Okay. So there are different types of stresses and so on. The most important one in our current society or current ills and so on, it really is nutrition, environmental, psychological, but very rarely physical, and so on. So let me give you a typical example. Okay, so let's take the current situation over the past 2 years and so on. A typical example of a poor health is someone who is concerned, worried, fearful, who eat poorly, who does not exercise, and who also got a very stressful job, and who come through with very different vague symptoms or multiple symptoms. Anxiety, depression, heartburn, insomnia, weight gain, bowel symptoms, irritable bowel, joint aches and pain, fatigue, brain fog, attention deficits, poor memory, and so on. So, there's a kind of quite typical. I mean, men in particular, they don't. A lot of young men come through the door and so on. They don't really have any particular physical issues and so on, but they have all these symptoms. And so we do know that stress manifests in different forms, but when the effect on the body, the effect on our physiology is very common. In that, once a stress stimulus or stimuli are there, it doesn't really matter whether it's perceived or whether it's real. Whether for example, real is basically something that's actually hurting you. You call stress response. Originally, we evolved to respond to pain, so we survive. So, so things like stress, threat to job and the threat of COVID and so on, they are what we call perceived stress and so on. They still trigger all the same physiological stress from your body. Okay. Now, so when that stress response is triggered in your body and so on, your body is very clever. It has always the balancing act and so on. So you have your stress response. At the same time, you have your relax and digest response. So it balances out and so on. So, in our caveman days and so on, we'll get chased by a few predators and so on. We'll get very stressed, we'll run away. And afterwards, this triggers. We start to rest and repair the damages and so on. So if that stress response is always constantly activated and so on, and we neglect this bit here, what do you think will happen? The likely conclusion is that that stress response will cause significant impact on our physiology. And the physiology is very predictable as well, because stress causes adrenaline, noradrenaline, and cortisol release. These are important transmitters and hormones. So they prime our body to behave in a certain way. So for example, when we stress and so on, we tend to have narrow tunnel vision. We'll get very anxious and paranoid. We get this, knots in the stomach. We've got muscle tension. Okay, and then we'll get this urge to defecate or urge to urinate and so on, So you know how it is that when you have an important presentation to make, suddenly, I need to go to the loo again. Okay, so all these are hormonal and neural response. You can't get away from that. Okay, and the stress hormone also starts to prepare your body. Your body is so clever. It goes, okay, now I'm stressed and so on. I need to prepare myself for now and later. So what does it do? It starts to produce more energy. So break down the body to produce glucose, fuel, so for instant power. Okay, but if that doesn't switch off and so on, you start to break down your muscle, so you become weaker, and they start to dampen your immune response. So the immune system doesn't know what to do. Can either be overactive or underactive. So we go into a bit of so it can affect that, and also affect your body inflammation as well. Inflammation is very helpful in case if you injured yourself, inflammation comes along and do all the necessaries. But if that inflammation does not switch off and become chronic inflammation does not have that repair function. It just wreaks havoc with your body, So, the chronic inflammation probably is the root cause to majority of the things we see. So in the brain, you tend to get anxiety and depression, headache, insomnia, poor attention, poor concentration. Okay, around the stomach lining and so on, you tend to get what we call globus. So you clear your throat all the time. You get heartburn. You get what we call gastroparesis. So your gut doesn't contract well. So you start to get digestion issues, bloating, heartburn, and the flatulence and so on. And in the muscle and so on, you get joint ache and so on. You get all sorts. So this is I'm trying to condense a really, really wide set of physiology down to a very quick set of conclusion there for you, Ben.
Thank you.
And at the same time, nutrition, believe it or not, nutrition is probably one of the biggest factors that people neglect, because remember, whatever we are, what we eat. And then, the modern diet has only been around for 40 years, completely opposite to what our physiology needs. And then, as a result, it causes inflammation, and inflammation in the gut means inflammation everywhere else. Gut inflammation is associated with cancer, heart disease, diabetes, autoimmune condition, frailty, dementia. Just to name a few.
So, Peter, can you share with us what PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, manifests itself in a whole multitude of different ways. Sometimes that event might have happened just once, sometimes that an event might have happened multiple times, but the post-traumatic stress disorder is where the body has gone into a state of disorder because it doesn't know how to handle the impact of the events that have occurred. There's no doubt I have no idea the number, but the last, let's just say 2 years have been an incredibly stressful time for people. And you've listed nutrition, environment, and psychological. And so the last two are the most interesting to me, although nutrition is just a given. For me, you have to take care of your nutrition or else you're already on the back foot. But the environmental and psychological. So the environment is the constant exposure to this real threat slash a perception of what that threat means to me in terms of COVID being a real threat, but I'm also perceiving what that threat is going to mean to me. So a threat from my environment, plus then the what I make that mean about the threat and the impact it's going to have on my body. So people are in a have been in a state of almost permanent stress since the outbreak back in 2019. What impact has that, just putting vaccination to one side for a minute, what impact has that had on us, and what has that done to create and our reaction to the perceived threat? What would that do to the environment inside the body? Does that question make sense?
Absolutely, yeah. So basically, let me just rephrase that question. So Ben, you're interested to find out that with this really quite significant and a stress stimuli that everyone is under, is perceiving at this stage, and what will that do to our psychology, and what will that do to our physiology?
Yes, so, exactly.
Yeah, that's no problem. Let's try explore that. Okay, so the first thing we have to understand is that in our mind, in our brain, there's actually two separate brain systems going on here. Okay, so we have what we call the neocortical brain, the human brain, the outer brain. That's the logic brain. Okay, so that's the bit that allows us to think, imagine, have memory, and basically what makes us human. Okay, and we dare even say that that's where the consciousness reside. In that we are conscious, and then we have logic. We can use logic and so on. And then the rest of the brain, about 95%, is what we call the basic brain. Really, that's kind of a sort of cumulative evolution from lizard to mammals to primate and so on. So that part of the brain is very powerful. It all builds on this very principle, in that A is for survival, B is to reproduce, and so on. That's how species perpetuate and survive. Okay. So the reason why that I want the listener to understand there are two separate brains here is that when you're under threat, your basic brain takes over. Your basic brain processes around about 14 million instructions per minute. Your logical brain will probably only process something like 400 at the most. Okay. So there's a huge discrepancy about how your brain works. Okay, so your logic brain only tends to work if you feel safe, protected, loved, so in a calm and safe environment. But if that environment doesn't exist and so on, if there's constant bombardment of threat and fear and so on, that part shuts off. We know that from functional MRI scan of the brain. If you create a threat, blood supply goes from the neocortical brain to the basic brain. So we know that happens. Okay, so let's take the modern day example and so on. The media, 24/7 constant bombardment of case number, death without context, new variants, so on, and then this sort of segregation, and basically, I dare say 99% of the mainstream media news is really just bad news, really. So don't call it mainstream media, just call it bloody bad news channel. BBC. So what does that do to our physiology? Okay, so our brain controls, our brain doesn't just perceive threat. Our brain is actually a really powerful coordinator of nerve response. So it controls how the rest of the body works. It also controls really important hormonal function, and so on. So basically, part of the brain will release all the important hormones that allow your body to work. Okay, so we kind of alluded a little earlier about when you have when you perceive the stress and so on, signal goes straight to the rest of your body. So from brain down to your adrenal gland releases adrenaline, noradrenaline, and cortisol, and so on. Okay, and so on top of that, and you also release a lot of other chemicals around your body and so on. So basically, your body is constantly in this state of fight and fright and preparing for a fight. Okay. And what does that do? I mean, that in turn, I mean, we call brain plastic, in that we can mold it. We can mold it based on what's happening to you and so on. So if the predominant response or experience you experience on a daily basis is negative and so on, is going to impact on your automatic response. 95% of what you do is completely automatic. You don't have to think about breathing. You don't have to think about your heart rate. You don't have to think about digesting. You don't have to think about, moving. Okay, you don't have to think about how you speak. You don't say, oh, by the way, throat muscle, would you please move a bit so I can say, ah. All that is automatic. Okay, so what I'm saying here is that if the recurring, dominant information in your life is negative and threat, that's how your physiology will start to adapt to this automatic threat behavior and so on. What does that mean? Well, that means that psychologically speaking, you will shift from logic to fearfulness. And from fearfulness, you're going to get anxious. You're going to become paranoid. You can't think clearly. You can't use your logic anymore. Even though that a person can be highly educated, can be completely logical, but when fear takes over, when your basic survival brain takes over, it takes over. There's no reasoning. Okay, in that situation, what tends to happen is that we can probably observe a lot of our current behavior from a chimpanzee society. Okay, so in chimps, basically, their brain is our basic brain. Okay, so when you're under threat, you look for authority figure, you group together, you oust anyone who does not agree with you because they present as a threat. No logic is required. You don't need logic. You just do. Okay, and then it's no wonder why anxiety, depression, and then you get to a certain stage and so on. Your brain is only designed to take so much, and it becomes self-destructive, suicidal ideas, mental health issues. Okay. And then on the rest of your body and so on, it does trigger quite profound inflammatory changes to your body. When you have inflammatory changes throughout your body, it's not just in one part, it's systemic. Okay, so it depends on which part of our bodily system you talk about or you look at and so on, you will get reciprocal symptoms. So we already talked about what happened in the brain. Okay, so if you're going to talk about the heart and so on, you're going to get things like palpitation. You're going to lose your exercise tolerance. And then if you ever become unwell and so on, you're more likely to get hyper-inflammatory response. Okay, so if you're already unwell in the first place, for example, you're diabetic obese or with an unfavorable cholesterol profile, you end up with heart disease. Okay, and then if you're unfortunate to have plaque or narrowing in an important artery, you end up with stroke. Okay, and then also inflammation switch off your body's surveillance system. Your body is always looking for a fight, clear any infection or threat. Survey your internal environment, making sure that the bad ones don't ever come out and play. So that's a very important mechanism to sort of keep bad cells, which turn as cancerous, at bay. It also has a role in promoting repair. So if that repair process is not adequate, you end up with scarring, dysfunctional tissue, and so on. Okay, so chronic stress can actually affect a really important immunological function of your entire existence, and so on. So I think some of the listeners will start to think, well, actually, hang on a minute, that's okay. How the hell can he describe what's going on with me? Because these responses are very typical. It's in every single person. That's your intrinsic human evolutionary biology. You can't get away from it. And anything that adds in additional stress, whether external or internal, can add to it. I'm not saying the V word, Ben, no. So no threats will be censored.
Don't say the V word, it's just Facebook, my gosh. When I mentioned about nutrition, almost it's a given for me. It's so helpful to hear you take us through this information, Pete, and sometimes you have to almost make an assumption about the body being healthy or not. When you're educating us here, really. Nutrition plays such a big part, and you also mentioned earlier on in the call, in the episode, data released without additional data and information about the current state of the system before it is contracted COVID, or, you know, what was the, and I think for me, as the numbers started to come out, it was just so black and white. It's this person has died with COVID, or this person has died without COVID. There was no information about the current state of health of the person when they actually contracted COVID. Hopefully this dovetails in and doesn't take us off piste. What is your response to that? Am I seeing something? Am I imagining things? Does this even matter? Can you?
That's a really, really, really important aspect to consider, Ben, because you know, you're right in that our response is very sort of binary, yes or no, you know, very bad or nothing at all. But life biology is not a polarized binary, exists a combination here. You get a whole spectrum. Okay, so for example, that you know, initially and so on, and during the initial pandemic and so on, and then there was a lot of fear because of uncertainty, but actually there wasn't. There was already a lot of credible details out. So Professor Ian Needis, you know, produced very credible information around the infection fatality and case fatality rate. And even Public Health England, you know, in I think it's the 19th of March in 2020, published that SARS-CoV-2, or the condition called COVID-19, is not a high consequence infective disease. What does that mean? That means that, you know, it's not downplaying its significance. It just means that it's not exerting such a significance to cause widespread public health danger. Okay, and so that's one thing. The second thing around a lot of this reporting, this binary reporting, is that it's failed to recognize that we as a population from cradle to grave has very different health profiles. Okay, and then from very early on and so on, it was portrayed that, you know, SARS-CoV-2 is universally lethal, and that is far from the truth. Okay, you know, around about February, March time, we'll have already identified very clearly the risk profiles of those at risk of SARS-CoV-2. I'm going to hesitate to use COVID-19 because it's a syndrome with multiple potential triggers and causes rather than just one. Okay, and so I'm going to park that. Sure. I know that sounds very technical, but it makes a big difference when we come to discuss it later. And so SARS-CoV-2 and so on is not universally lethal. We know that the average death is around about 80 to 83. Okay, and we know that those who succumb to it has very typical profile. For example, they're elderly. They usually have conditions such as dementia, hypertension, and diabetes, and the kidney disease. Those four things also has one common denominator called metabolic syndrome, which is basically chronic inflammation of your body affecting different organ systems. Okay, and so if you were immunosuppressed, i.e. immune system doesn't work very well, you also succumb to it. And everyone else, okay, and then you start to look at everyone else and so on. It's very bizarre. So out in the far extreme age range with health conditions, they're very, very bad news. You know, case fatality rate around about 30% and so on. But if you're under 65 with no health condition, your infection fatality rate is less than 0.01%, about the same as a moderate flu. Okay, so if you're under 45 with no health conditions and so on, your mortality rate is not even 1 in 10,000. If you are under 18, your fatality rate is so small, Oxford Uni didn't bother collecting it. So that's the risk profile and so on. And yet, from what we hear, SARS-CoV-2 killer. Okay, so that's the first thing to recognize. Biology never behaves as we report them. It's always the same, you know, every single year, NHS under pressure, you know, another flu pandemic, epidemic, and so on, you know, very sensational, you know, very fear-stoking. Okay, so just coming back to sort of answering, I'm trying to sort of refresh my mind, my memory about what the actual question is. So just remind me the important aspects you want to get out from that last question.
Yes, essentially I think you've answered it, Pete. Really, is just how big a part does the current state of the body play in its risk and in its risk with regards to contracting something like COVID-19, which, and I guess underneath that, what my heart is longing for is when my wife caught COVID-19, the paramedics came and I asked them, they wanted to take the details and shouted at us, barked at us for not self-isolating sooner and blah, blah, blah. And then I asked them, you seem, the first question you've asked is, have we self-isolated and where have we been? Have you got any information about how we can actually recover? You know, what does taking any responsibility for our health look like in this situation? And neither of them had a response. And I guess I was sort of partly expecting that, but just the whole time, the binary message, it has been a binary message of up and down, yes or no, this way or that way. It's never supported with, here's a whole bunch of stuff that would really help you and your body prepare for the unforeseen and hopefully you're not going to, unforeseen circumstances. So, but hopefully I might have even changed the question somewhat there. But
no, that's a really relevant question, really. So, you know, at this stage, that's you know, we constantly engage in this fearful and how do we get ourselves out of this situation and so on. But actually, when you come to look at the root causes here, that SARS-CoV-2 is potentially one of the many triggers of poor health. But at the same time, with the modern lifestyle, the fact that we eat processed food, okay, and our diet is full of artificial and high carbohydrate based items that our evolutionary biology was never designed to do. Okay, and at the same time, our environment is pretty toxic, really. You know, the number of nanoparticles in the air, you know, as well, and the nitrous particles and so on. You know, they don't exactly help, really. I suppose one thing from on this lockdown is that the air got better, and because of less pollution and so on. And so there's quite a few root reasons why a person doesn't do very well. Okay, so we're going to explore a bit more about the fear psychological factor and so on. Let's look at nutritional factor, really, because nutritional factor really is quite important. You know, just by changing one's nutritional behavior, we can probably save a lot of the souls we lost last year. Okay, so this concept called metabolic flexibility or metabolic syndrome. Okay, so the reason why we use that term is that metabolism is a term to describe how your body functions. And the body always trying to establish a balance or equilibrium or homeostasis, depends where you're coming from, but they all mean the same thing, achieving a balance. Okay, you have a pivot, and then depends what happened to you, your body, if something goes wrong, your body's always try balance repair it, try go back to the baseline. But you know, that's taken 2.5 million years of evolution to get to this stage. And Homo sapiens has been around about 70,000 years. Okay, so our biology has developed very, very, very slowly but surely and predictably of what we need in terms of nutrition and so on. And then around about the 1970s and so on, suddenly fat became the villain and so on, and everyone should go into low fat. And what happened is that's basically low fat, you know, one of the most important ingredients of our life, sustaining ingredient has been vilified and taken away, and adding all this grain, all this carbohydrate, all this processed food, and all this manufactured oil to make things taste great, which is great because they're very addictive. They're more addictive than heroin, cocaine, but they also create profound amounts of havoc in your body because every single item, every single change to our physiology takes roughly around about 400 to 800 years to adapt genetically. So basically, we're trying to do in the last 40 years what our body has done over what our species is trying to do over 70,000 years. That doesn't quite tally well, really. So in order to in order to live well, to remain well, especially in current environment, we really have to go back to what our ancestry biology is all about. So what were we like, let's say 20,000 years ago, when Homo sapiens was still tall, healthy, and free from disease? So what happened is that we ate natural whole stuff only, mostly animal, foraged, and so on. And we have very little carbohydrates. We certainly have very little sugar. Okay, and at the same time, we didn't stay out all night or do night shift. When the sun comes up, we're awake. When the sun goes down, we'll go to sleep. That's what we have. I think this is called circadian rhythm. The circadian rhythm governs a lot of very important hormonal response. Okay, if you disrupt that, your immune system can't repair. People become sick. Okay, and at the same time, that we totally destroyed. I mean, the hygiene is important. Hygiene has been very important to sort of eliminate and almost eradicate a lot of infectious disease in the past that killed back in Victorian era and so on. But we've gone too far now. So remember, we as Homo sapiens evolved with Earth. We're supposed to be grounded. We're supposed to mix with dirt. We're supposed to sleep on the ground. We're supposed to be in nature. We're supposed to be near animal. We're supposed to be around plants, trees, shrubberies, and so on. Because we have this audacity to think that human physiology is pure and sterile, but actually no. We have this concept called holobiome. Okay, so holo is whole. Biome is basically what happened between different parts of your body coming together. Okay, so on your body, Ben, you probably have more than 100 trillion microbes. That's bacteria, virus, parasite, yeast, and so on and so forth, compared to your measly 30 trillion cells. So you have 3 times more bugs to make up you than your human cells. Okay, and then if you understand the magnitude of this number, it's like, crikey, that's a huge number. How on earth are we not dead yet? That's because we need them to be healthy. Our modern life has completely destroyed our holobiome. We're no longer in nature. Listen, all this alcohol, gel, and sanitation and so on is killing billions of microbes. That's absolutely essential to keep us healthy. Okay, we have this symbiotic relationship with microbes. Okay, so one of the best examples I give to people is that you always know someone, they just never get sick. Okay, they can go see people, they can go see patients, they work amongst the sickest people, coughing and spluttering, but they're fine. They're never ill. And yet you have people who goes, oh, I don't want to catch that, and just a sniffle in the distance, 200 yards away, and suddenly they caught the flu. Why is that? And then that's a complex relationship between your psychology, in that your psychology affects your nervous system, your hormone system, your immune system, which I already described before. And also at the same time, those people who never get sick has some very important common ground, in that they eat well, they exercise frequently, they engage in activity in nature, they sleep well. And then as a result, because they are well, you very rarely see obese well people. So weight is a reflection of how well you are. Okay, if you're well, you have low weight. If you're not well or inflamed, your weight goes up. Okay, and that's the important distinction, because people want to lose weight to be healthy, but actually, if you aim to be healthy, you lose weight. Nuance is very subtle, but the approach is completely different.
I should have booked you for 3 hours, not 1 hour. How much longer can you go for, Peter? I know.
I'm fine. Ben, right, carry on.
We got about 10 is 10 minutes okay? Because I'm really
carry
conscious
on. My boy's
of
gone to sleep, and then if you want to record this and split into 2 parts, that's fine, as long as that you've got time then.
Yeah, great. There's, again, this is I'm always stuck between asking a question that's just about me and my perspective versus trying to ask general questions so it's as helpful as possible. This one is just about me, in my opinion, and the way I have handled the pressure, quote unquote, of the last 18, 19, 20 months. And I have been, both my wife and I, we really dove into physical health. I've been physically healthy like my whole life, always exercised, always done sport and things, and relatively injury-free during that time. I've always taken I've taken my diet way more seriously in terms of consuming more whole foods, less carbohydrates, and really my diet's really clean. We're not vegan, but we're very heavily veggie. So that's my wife for you. I keep my mind clear as possible. I'm always working on my mind to, be down in the body, be down on the heart, be down in the heart. I've done a lot of my own emotional work and let go of a backlog of old trauma. It feels like I've been doing that work forever. And I stumbled across Wim Hof's work right at the beginning of the pandemic, the cold water exposure and the breath and breath work. And I don't know why I just latched onto that. I thought, I don't understand what's coming. I don't understand the consequences of it. What have I got to do to be as healthy and as COVID ready as possible? And so I've been in and out of cold water ever since it began. My diet's just got better and better. My health has got better and better. And my resolve to have some clear bloody mindedness of, I'm going to be fine. I'm going to be able to manage this. Like, I'm just convinced I am. And I feel almost guilty because it's been so hard for millions of people to make a statement like that. There's almost some guilt that I think I shouldn't be allowed to say that because I don't understand it. Yeah, I've had COVID. It took me 5 days to get through. It was like a heavy cold, lost my taste and things. And I felt really, really, really rough. But we got through. My wife had a very, very different experience. So what's my question for you? What if we could develop a natural approach to I want to say do what the vaccine's supposed to do but doesn't. I know that's I might have to delete that later. How can we use natural confidence in our bodies, in our health, in our environment, in our psychology to prepare our bodies to actually overcome this, to withstand it, and to use it to get stronger as a species and to move away from medical intervention around it? Hopefully there's a question there somewhere, Pete. What can we do? And I think we've been hitting some notes of this question throughout the podcast, but please respond to that.
Yeah. So again, I'm going to paraphrase your question there. I suppose, Ben, what you're asking here is that what can we do individually to ensure that we can optimize our health?
Great word. Yes.
Well-being, to cope with the current challenge and any future challenges.
And because yeah, absolutely.
Because this is not going to be the one-off, and so on. There will be many different challenges, and so on. Okay, so again, I'm going to go back to I'm going to go back to my initial concept of the 4 pillars of health, okay, or well-being. So we talked about that. So you need to have adequate health, adequate wealth, adequate purpose, and adequate community, and so on. So let's start with health, and so on. So if you can revert back to our ancestral diet, so basically, no sugar, no refined food, no processed food, and so on. A good combination of clean, wholesome food, animal products, plant products, and so on, and and no artificial oil. You can go a long way already because that already take care of your gut health, your microbe health, your inflammatory profile, your metabolic resilience and flexibility. Okay, and then in terms of wealth and so on, I think most people think wealth as in material, monetary, and so on. But actually, our psychology falls within that category. We need to ensure that we are wealthy in mind and spirit and intellect and so on. Okay, so whilst we continue to pursue this fear for pure survival instinct and so on, we can also very easily to switch that around, finding things that help make us tick start to read more or enjoy things that actually add more information and bolster your logical brain rather than just surviving on your survival brain. And so on. So that's what I meant by things like spiritual and and intellectual wealth and so on. And obviously that you need some finances to survive and so on. Without that, everything else falls apart. And the purpose, I think, during the last 2 years is quite difficult for most people to truly put their hands on their hearts and say, look, I know the reason why I'm here. But ultimately, that's we as a species, and so on, we're put on this for a purpose. We're here for a purpose, and so on. And then, those who can stop, reflect, and perhaps think more deeply around their purpose, and so on, they tend to do better. And those who lost their way, and sometimes you need some facilitation and support to find your way. And that's why community comes in handy, because we as a species has evolved to be a social being. We're supposed to live in a tribe. Kids relies on this interaction, different facial expression, different behavior to develop our brain and thinking and behavior. And so we are supposed to mix with people. What happened in the last 2 years? We are separated, we're isolated, and so on. So it doesn't matter what happened now, Ben. Even if lockdown happens, find a way to be with your group, find a way to be with your tribe, find a way to be with your family, friends, loved ones, and so on. Or break all the bloody rules, because all these rules are unlawful and unconstitutional and unethical. And the reason why I can say that is that envirobiology behaves predictably. It starts bad, it gets better and better and better and fades out, period. If you had done nothing last year, we wouldn't be having this conversation. Things will go back to normal. The fact is that we are perpetuating, or we allow that to be perpetuated and so on. This, excuse my French, this shit never stops.
Peter, thank you. I've just got a few more questions. Almost a disclaimer here. Well, we are speaking to a doctor, and we're trying not to speak in absolutes, and I'm trying not to ask questions in absolutes. But I refuse to believe that there's nothing we can do apart from this is the root. I really think that. No, I'm going to hit pause on my judgment actually there and keep it on topic. So just to wrap this up, P, what can you tell us a little bit about your new venture and in what direction you're moving? I caught wind of some of your description from your Facebook post about what you're wanting to create, and I love it. It felt like a shining light just shot through the screen. Can you paint a bit of a picture of what your movements look like and where you're heading personally and professionally? Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. Okay. So if you don't mind, I'll plug what I'm trying to do here.
Absolutely. Okay.
Yeah. I think a lot of us have realized that the control in our lives are so far removed, it's so externalized. We almost feel helpless to change our current situation. Yeah. So this is what I call the locus control, external locus control. Basically, everything that happens to me is dependent on other. So the government's providing all the sort of security and all the provision and so on. But actually, going back, I'm sorry, I keep on using the same analogy, but we have to go back to how we evolved as a species in the first place. Okay, so the way that we have evolved is that we have a lot of internal locus of control. Basically, we control what happened to us, and we decide. We'll group together in a small tribe for mutual dependency, codependency, and interdependency for us to survive. Okay, so because at this stage, that's everything I see, what's going on at this stage is completely against our biological needs. And then everything that we see at this stage, that whether one believes in certain agenda or not, but you can see very clearly, the more man-made intervention is imposed, the worse the outcome, and so on. So the natural conclusion here is that if you continue to allow that process to happen, we're going to get sicker, we're going to become more unwell and so on. So we have to start to do something. And the intention and the motivation is very clear that they will not stop. I'm not going to specify who they are, but they will not stop and so on. Power is intoxicating. I think we all feel that. And so that will continue. So what can we do individually and so on? So individually, given that my business is helping people, my business is facilitating counsel for a person to start to take back the control. So with that in mind, you can understand why that I'm starting to promote things like this. Start our own tribes. And then not only that, start our own tribes, let's work with other tribes who feels in a very similar way for mutual codependent interdependency for our perpetuity and so on. So what does that look like in my world? So what that looks like is basically I'm building a community around me. I'm saying, look, guys, there's 6 million people can't access health service on the waiting list. Whilst they wait, they're dying, they come to harm and so on. We're going to sit back and whinge and moan, or we're going to do something about it. So I'm starting non-discriminatory health service here. Okay, so I'm going to help those healthcare professionals or alternative practitioners. I'm going to bring them together and say, look, you can either work the way we have worked, it hasn't worked. Okay, and then let's do something that actually works. Okay, and I'm going to say to those patient. Oh, actually, I shouldn't call them patient. Really, they're kind of our contemporaries and so on, or our I don't know what you call people in your tribe, and I haven't quite found out the vocabulary. But anyway, so if those people want to come and use the service and so on, we want to encourage them to, hey, look, it's not about I'm sick, can you help me? It's I'm sick. There's a reason. And I want you to help me so I can take charge and change that situation. So it certainly becomes a dependent relationship to a very autonomous, self-driving. So not only that affects your physical health, you also will improve your mental and psychological health, because we already know that well-being is more than just physical health. Okay, and then so that's what I'm doing. I'm trying to encourage those people who need help, change their mentality so they become self-caring, taking responsibility, taking accountability. And whilst I can help, support, upskill those people who is interested in more whole person approach, like a lot of the things we'll talk about tonight. Okay, and then we'll come together as a community. And then we'll start to look at infrastructures. For example, we can go to disused shop, disused practices, disused nursing home. Create an environment where that magic, that evolutionary human biology and behavior can happen again. Okay, and then I'm also kind of talking to other people like finance experts, investors, and so on, because some of them are pretty fed up. They're thinking the very similar way, going, my goodness, this world is crazy. What can we do to help? And so on. So there's a lot of people from all walks of life, who is realizing actually we need to take control back for our own well-being now. So that's what I'm doing here in terms of health center, whole person health center care. But that we don't just stop there really, because that's just one small part. That's just one small part of the tribe, really. I suppose if you take the African tribe, for example, they have about 100, 150 at most, and you have the elders who lead, who share and coordinate the wisdom. And you have very different people doing very different things. You have the sort of medicine man who does a healing and help. You have the patriarch who goes and hunt. You have the matriarch, gathering and look after the tribe. Okay, so if actually that's what's needed now to restore our health and well-being, we need to do that again. So why is it to stop? What is it to stop us to actually start living around the fringe of orthodoxy, and then start to pay homage to our biology? So start to build perhaps an outer society gated community. For example, that people talk about, I've got a bit of land and so on. Let's do a bit of permaculture. They start to grow food. Let's be self-sufficient. They start doing some animal farming and regenerate the soil, and they have this community structure where that is not based on consumption, but it's based on contribution and so on. So lots of people want to do that. And I can't affect all that change as a person. So what I do nowadays is that, because I speak to a lot of people, I'm trying to coordinate the effort. So, share best practices, and then also help others try implement, similar plans, and so that's kind of that gives a tremendous pleasure and purpose. Because remember, one of the things that we feel in life is that we must have a purpose to be here. Viktor Frankl, survivor of the Second World War, and fantastic psychiatrist in logotherapy, because a man needs a purpose. So that's the current venture, very audacious. Somebody say, "Oh my goodness, you're absolutely nuts. You're one person. How can you do all this?" I'm not doing this, but as a one person, I'm doing this as a one of the collective.
Wait till Kerry hears this. She'll be asking for your postcode and wanting to come up for a meeting. She's going to absolutely love this. The purpose, the never being done, there's such a huge amount of energy to change the direction of the river, and some rivers just want to flow in the direction they want to go, and trying to stop it takes a huge amount of energy. And we're free enough and smart enough and capable enough to just build a whole new water course, to build a whole new avenue to.
Well, just relating to that, and I do believe, I'm a great advocate in that nature is so powerful. It has its own way of operating and so on. And that mankind is very clever, but compared to Mother Nature, we are insignificant. So the more we can go with Mother Nature's intention, and the more likely we'll continue to enjoy the sort of ongoing evolutionary benefit. And the more we sustain and support artificial endeavor against nature's intention, the more likely that we're going to end up in suffering and in very negative and dark place. And so, in some way, that's my spiritual and philosophical reason why that I do. I'm very against any, very coercive intervention on the masses. I'm not going to use any particular technical terms, so I think most people understand what I'm saying here.
Quick fire round for you, Pete. Just wrapping up here. Being such an advocate of health, what's your favorite McDonald's meal?
No.
When you get up in the morning, the first thing you do is?
I have a pint of water.
Favorite Christmas movie of all time?
Ooh. I don't have one because I don't watch much telly.
Okay.
Or movies.
I'll tell you what mine and Kerry's is. It's Christmas with the Coopers. It's a beautiful, undramatic movie about happy family, or a family that finds happiness. It's a sweet movie. The book, your favorite book of all time, and a book that you would recommend for people on the back of this episode, because they might be different. If they're the same, great.
Okay. So my favorite book of all time is written by Stephen Covey, called The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. So when they describe a lot of the kind of internal, keeping about how we can about the habits, how we can reinforce and sort of encourage habits that actually it's encourage us to sort of be more specific, and these are really sharp instruments to achieve what we want to achieve, and so on. So, for example, I'm applying a lot of techniques to what I'm doing at this stage. So that's probably one of my all-time favorite. I read about 4 times. Every time I read it again, I learn something new. So, and that's fantastic. So, and in terms of the kind of a health and well-being book I can recommend to our listener. Oh dear me. There's been quite a few books and so on, but I'm gonna say, look, rather than books and so on, okay, I think our listeners should look up Dr. Paul Mason down in Australia. and also Professor Tim Noakes, that's Noakes, in South Africa. Okay, because these two, I call them celebrities appropriately because they are truly celebrities. They work around our metabolic health. It's immense. The wealth of information they impart in terms of short chunks of lectures and or longer lectures, or just very specific to the point, with a lot of evidence incorporated, is tremendous. They can explain things that I can never dream of explaining. I know, even though I know instinctively, I know what I know, but I can't articulate what they can do. So it's fantastic. Look up Paul Mason, look up Tim Noakes, and those in the UK, look up David Unwin. He's what we call low carb doctor, but that's not the point. What he does do is that he advocates more ancestral, evolutionary, biological nutrition to improve our health. So I know it's been a cop-out and so on, but it's not really books, but it is still information.
That is perfect. And if anybody wanted to come and just connect with you and just read a bit more about you, Peter, what platform or what place could they go and connect with you?
So I'm quite verbal on social media. Until I'm banned or censored, you can find me. It's Peter Chan. I call my portrait. It's the one in my blue scrub. Or you can reach me via our website. So I do have an organization called Principal Health Care Services, and the website is www.pvhs.org.uk. And so within that website, there's a tab specifically saying whole person health service, and that's where people tend to sort of reach me in terms of building services.
I will put that in the bio so people don't even need to remember. Just click through and go and meet Peter. You're one of, but you are absolutely one of my heroes right now. Thank you so much for your time, Pete. I'm sure we're going to get some great feedback here, and we might compile something else to drill down a bit more into what you've just covered. Such a breadth of knowledge and wisdom and experience for us. Hopefully the listeners can feel the light from you and through you, and that be such a guide in the darkness. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Ben, for having me, and thank you for providing your platform for me to reach out to more audience than I can do individually. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. God bless, bud. Bye-bye.
Okay, good night, Ben.
Bye-bye.